On this vote, the yeas are 238, the nays are 183. The bill is passed. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan rise?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to speak out of order for the purpose of making an announcement.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to announce to all members...
Excuse me. The House will be in order. The gentleman has the right to be heard. The gentleman might continue.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to announce to all members of the House that the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence has ordered the bill H.R. 754, the Intelligence Authorization Act for fiscal year 2011, reported favorably to the House with an amendment. The committee's report will be filed today. Mr. Speaker, the classified schedule of authorizations and the classified annex accompanying the bill will be available for review by members at the offices of the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence in room HVC 304 at the Capitol Visitor Center beginning any time after this report is filed. The committee office will be open during regular business hours for the convenience of any member who wishes to review this material prior to its consideration by the House. I anticipate that H.R. 754 will be considered in the House in the near future, perhaps as early as next week. I recommend that members wishing to review the classified annex contact the committee's Director of Security to arrange a time and date for that viewing. This will assure the availability of the committee's staff to assist members who desire assistance during their review of these classified materials. I urge interested members to review these materials in order to better understand the committee's recommendations. The classified annex to the committee's report contains the committee's recommendations on the intelligence bill for fiscal year 2011 and related classified information that cannot be disclosed publicly. It is important that members keep in mind the requirements of Clause 13 of House Rule 23, which only permits access to classified information by those members of the House who have signed the oath provided for in the rule. If a member has not yet signed that oath but wishes to review the classified annex and schedule of authorizations, the committee staff can administer the oath and see that it is executed form is sent to the clerk's office. In addition, the committee's rules require that members agree in writing to a non-disclosure agreement. The agreement indicates that the member has been granted access to the classified annex and that they are familiar with the rules of the House and the committee with respect to classified nature of the information and the limitations on the disclosure of that information. Mr. Speaker, I thank you for your time and consideration.
The gentleman's time has expired. Who seeks recognition? The gentleman from Utah is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute for the purpose of making an announcement.
Without objection, the gentleman from Utah is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. The Committee on Rules may meet the week of May 9th to grant a rule that could limit the amendment process for floor consideration of H.R. 754, the Intelligence Authorization Act for fiscal year 2011. Any member wishing to offer an amendment to the bill must submit an electronic copy of the amendment and description via the Rules Committee website. Members must also submit 30 hard copies of the amendment, 1 copy of a brief explanation of the amendment, and an amendment log in form to the Rules Committee in room H312 at the Capitol by 12 p.m. on Tuesday, May 10th, 2011. Both electronic and hard copies must be received by that date and time specified. Members should draft their amendments to the text of the bill as ordered reported by the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, which is available on the Rules Committee website. Members should also use the Office of Legislative Counsel to ensure their amendments are drafted in the most appropriate format. Members should also seek with the Office of the Parliamentarian, the Committee on the Budget, and the Congressional Budget Office to be certain their amendments comply with the rules of the House and the Congressional Budget Act. If you have any questions, please contact Chairman Dreyer or the Rules Committee staff. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina rise?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to be removed as a co-sponsor of H.R. 1081.
Without objection. Pursuant to House Resolution 836 and Rule 18, the Chair declares the House and the Committee of the Whole on the State of the Union for further consideration of H.R. 1214. Will the gentleman from Idaho, Mr. Simpson, kindly resume the chair?
The House is in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for the further consideration of H.R. 1214, which the clerk will report by title.
A bill to repeal mandatory funding for school-based health center construction.
When the Committee of the Whole House rose earlier today, all time for general debate had expired. All time for general debate has expired. Pursuant to the rule, the bill shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule and shall be considered read. No amendment to the bill shall be in order except those received for printing in the portion of the congressional record designated for that purpose in a daily issue dated May 2, 2011, and except for pro forma amendments for the purpose of debate. Each amendment so received may be offered only by the member who has caused it to be printed or a designee and shall be considered read. Are there amendments to the bill? For what purpose does the gentlelady from Texas rise? Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 1, printed in the congressional record, offered by Ms. Jackson Lee of Texas.
The gentlelady from Texas is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. I rise to ask my colleagues to join me in supporting this amendment, and I appreciate very much my friend and colleague from Texas, and I believe that this is an amendment that Republicans and Democrats can join. It may be for different reasons. I've indicated that I believe the repealing of the support for school-based health clinics and construction thereof is an unfortunate act on behalf of America's children. But my amendment is very simple. It requires the Department of Health and Human Services to post public notice on its official website that the mandated funds from Section 410(1)A of the Patient Protection Affordable Care Act, including the amounts of the funds, will be rescinded. It explains to the American public just what we're doing, and it gives them a line-by-line, dollar-by-dollar impact of what happens when they take money away that's already being invested, that will be invested, to help build a health care infrastructure in their neighborhoods so that children like this young man and many others who may not have access to health care can have a school-based clinic. The amendment will provide the public with important information about mandatory school-based health center funding that will no longer be available for them to receive these preventative care services. This amendment also assists my good friends on the other side of the aisle by permitting them to easily show the American public that they're cutting government spending. But yet, we must weigh the balance. Cutting spending or alleging that you're going to benefit from these cut funds and undermining the health care system of America. When Congress passed the Affordable Care Act in 2010, the President signed into law, the Department of Health and Human Services was given the mandate to provide funding for expanded and sustain national health investment in school-based health center construction programs to improve clinical preventative services and help restrain the growth in private and public health costs. Nearly every state has school-based health centers. There are about 2,000. It provides mandatory funds for building and improving school-based health centers. There are now 350 applications for 46 states with shovel-ready projects. It couldn't be all bad. And H.R. 1214 is passed. It will kill those funds. It will repeal it. And yet, this particular amendment will point out Sophie's choices, not really good choices, to take away from our children good health care under the pretense of cutting the deficit. Mind you now, the majority of the funding that is being cut by my friends is from discretionary services, few dollars that represent only a small portion of the nation's budget, appropriations, and deficit. And so I ask that we support this amendment because truth is in the pudding. Let's see what they're doing and how you can get good health care and cut school-based clinics. Let me quickly say this. We're trying to make sure that we have places in neighborhoods for people to evacuate to, schools that are secure enough and strong enough that you could run or you could evacuate, or you could be safe in place. School-based clinics, health clinics, provide places to take the wounded from whether a hurricane or a tornado or a disaster unforeseen or a man-made disaster. So I'd ask my colleagues to vote for this amendment, to support this amendment, because it shows the light of what we should and should not be doing. With that, I reserve my time.
Gentlemen, reserve your time.
We've done it all throughout the day.
We're under a 5-minute rule.
We're operating under the 5-minute rule. In case you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Pardon me?
Gentlelady still has 1 minute and 10 seconds remaining.
And I'm trying to reserve my time.
You can't reserve your time.
Well, let me make the point that in earlier debate today, the Speaker allowed me to reserve, or the Chair, and so I take issue with the ruling. And what is the basis of the ruling?
The 5-minute rule, gentlelady has to use her time, not reserve her time.
And can I have an explanation as to why I was allowed to do so previously?
At that.
Well, so can I have the explanation restated again?
The Chair would tell the gentlelady that the House is operating under the 5-minute rule and not allotted time, controlled time.
All right, so in my parliamentary inquiry, the answer is that we're under the 5-minute rule?
That's right.
Let me just indicate that school-based clinics represent a source of homeland security. And in fact, what we will find is that we will stop states in their track for trying to provide the kind of health care, not only for children going to school every day, to be able to protect them, but also in a long-range effort. Does anyone remember H1N1? I do, because I went to my schools where there was an epidemic of H1N1, and we had it all across the nation. We were panicked. And I will tell you that school-based clinics can be a source of relief for children either coming to school with infections or some devastation coming about. I'd ask my colleagues to support this very simple amendment, which gives to the American public the reason why we shouldn't cut these funds. Cutting funds, killing health care. Cutting funds, killing health care. Support this very thoughtful amendment that provides you with the reason for us being able to support school-based health clinics, for homeland security, for the ability to evacuate and be secure in time of disaster, and yes, to take care of the millions of children and to respond to the states that are not Democratic or Republican who have 350 applications on the record. I ask my colleagues to support the amendment. I yield back.
Member seek recognition. What purpose, gentleman? Texas rise.
I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, the Jackson-Lee amendment would require the Secretary of Health and Human Services to post on an HHS public website a notice of the rescission of unobligated balances from the mandatory funded for school health center construction provided under Section 4101A of the Patient Protection Affordable Care Act and the amount of that rescission. Mr. Chairman, I support transparency in government. I actually wish there was more transparency, especially when the last Congress was putting together this new health care law. We still do not know why certain projects were given mandatory funding and others were determined to be discretionary programs. No explanation has been given as to why construction of these facilities is mandatory and yet the staffing remains discretionary. Paying for construction of health centers has always been the responsibility of states and localities, and the federal government would help with the staffing. The Patient Protection Affordable Care Act turned that long-term policy on its head. Now, I recognize that the Democrats in the House of Representatives, now the House minority, did not write the bill. In fact, the bill was written behind closed doors in the Senate and probably down at a coffee shop down by the White House. Yet no one who was in the room or at the coffee shop will explain how the bill came to be. If the author of this amendment feels that this would increase transparency, then I will support the amendment. I would hope that all members would take the opportunity to increase transparency and demand transparency on how the backroom deals that sealed the fate of our health care system in the hands of Washington bureaucrats came to pass. Mr. Chairman, I will yield back the balance. I urge an aye vote on the amendment, and I will yield back the balance of my time.
Anyone seek further recognition? Gentleman from New Jersey.
Strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
I yield such time as she may consume to the gentlewoman from Texas.
Gentleman from Texas.
I just rise to thank the gentleman from...
standing.
Thank you. I rise to thank the gentleman from Texas for accepting this amendment. I think it shows that though we may have agreements that differ or positions that differ on the underlying legislation, this is an initiative for transparency, and it will help explain to the American people. Let me also conclude by saying it should be very clear that this funding is not used for health care, in particular on personnel, but it is to build the structures that will provide and protect children to be able to have these clinics, more access to health care for communities, and a source and site to be able to protect people who are impacted by natural or man-made disaster. With that, I would ask my colleagues to support this legislation, and I yield back my time.
Gentleman from New Jersey.
Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further debate on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from Texas? Hearing none, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Texas. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. Opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it.
Mr. Chair,
the ayes have it.
Mr. Chair,
Gentlelady from Texas.
Requesting a recorded vote.
Recorded vote is requested. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Texas will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey rise?
Pre-printed in the record as Amendment Number 2 to H.R. 1214 as the designee of Representative Katz.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment Number 2, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Pallone of New Jersey.
Gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment provides for a GAO study to determine school districts most in need of constructing or renovating school-based health centers. Basically, it asks the controller, well, I should say mandates the controller, conduct a study to determine the school districts most in need of construction or renovation, and not later than 1 year after the date of the enactment, the controller has to submit to the Congress a report setting forth the results and conclusions of the study under this subsection. Mr. Chairman, I know we've had a lot of debate today about money, but the fact of the matter is that the $50 million per year doesn't actually cover the costs of all of the schools that have requested and applied for construction or renovation funds. And so that's why I would like to have this amendment passed and hopefully accepted by the other side, so that we can find out exactly how many more of these clinics are in need of funding or centers are in need of funding. I guess I have to yield back.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. For what purpose, the gentleman from Texas rise?
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the requisite
Gentleman's
number of words.
recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in support of the amendment. The amendment requires the General Accountability Office to conduct a study to determine the school districts in the United States most in need of constructing or renovating school-based health centers. You know, actually, the amendment is refreshing. I only wish we'd had an opportunity to have this discussion in our committee a year and a half ago before the Patient Protection Affordable Care Act passed. This amendment underscores one of the major flaws in the Patient Protection Affordable Care Act. Rather than conduct hearings and markups on this specific program, the School-Based Health Center Construction Fund was lumped in with hundreds of other programs in a 2,700-page bill. I think the amendment will help the Congress determine whether the need exists and to quantify the target dollars in a careful manner. My only regret is that in the last Congress, the then Democratic majority did not request this study before providing $200 million in mandatory funding for the school-based health center construction under the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. Congress should determine the need before authorizing and appropriating dollars. That's, after all, regular order. That's the way we are supposed to do it, not simply throw the money out after a program because we feel that it may be a good program or we believe that it may be a good program. No. We're dealing with the taxpayer dollars. It is our obligation to show those dollars are going to be wisely spent and then proceed with the appropriation and the authorization and then the appropriation. I believe this amendment will help in that process, and I'll urge support of the amendment and yield back the balance of my time.
Who seeks recognition?
Move the amendment, Mr. Chairman.
The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from New Jersey. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. Opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it.
Just a roll call.
Gentleman requests a roll call pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18. Further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from New Jersey will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee do now rise.
Motion is on the question is on the motion offered by the gentleman from Texas. The committee do now rise. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. Committee rises.
That moves actually even faster than I thought it was going to move.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Speaker, the Committee on the Whole House on the State of the Union having had under consideration H.R. 1214 directs me to report that it has come to no resolution thereon.
The Chairman of the Committee of the Whole House of the State of the Union reports that the committee has had under consideration H.R. 1214 and has come to no resolution thereon.
Chair lays before the House the following personal requests.
Leave of absence requested for Mr. Griffin of Arkansas for Monday, May 2nd.
Without objection, the personal requests are granted. Recognition for 1 minute. Speeches.
He'll recognize me.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5, 2011, the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Minority Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to be on the floor for such an important issue and joined by my colleagues. I am holding the time until Mr. Richmond arrives, but let me just indicate that this is an enormous crisis when 9 of our soldiers are killed in the way that they were killed in Afghanistan. And for many of us who are concerned about the continuing conflict and the next steps, it is important to be able to offer our sympathy to their families and as well to be able to ask for an investigation as to the basis of their loss. So it is important tonight that we educate our colleagues about the challenges that those brave soldiers faced, the conditions under which they lost their lives, and to say to their families that we will not rest until we have the opportunity to secure all of the facts and to be able to establish a reaction or a basis on seeking a response from the Afghan government and certainly from those who are in supervision of the armed forces in the region, in the theater. With that in mind, as we offer our sympathy and express our desire for a full understanding and story as to what happened, I want to yield to the distinguished gentleman from Louisiana and thank him for... Okay. Let me yield the time back. As we conclude this remarks, Mr. Chairman, let me just say that I look forward to a full airing of this unfortunate circumstance, and I hope that we will continue to seek information for these families and on behalf of these brave soldiers. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back to the chair.
Yields back.
Under
the Speaker's announced policy of January 5, 2011, the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Richmond, is recognized for the remainder of the Minority Leader's hour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to first, before I start, thank the gentlelady from Texas, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, not only for introducing the segment tonight, but for the work that she has done for people all across the country, and especially when you talk about disasters. She was there for the city of New Orleans and the metropolitan region after Hurricanes Katrina and Rita to make sure that everyone was included in the rebuilding and the reconstruction. And it was a lot of her effort that made sure that we could rebuild the city of New Orleans. And as we just suffer loss around the country with the tornadoes that hit, I'm reminded of Hurricanes Katrina and Rita. But more importantly, Mr. Speaker, I'm reminded of the people in this Congress who go above and beyond to make sure that we take care of everyone in this country. And for that, I want to thank Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee for doing that. Mr. Speaker, tonight I want to focus on our brave soldiers who recently fell in Afghanistan. We want to focus on their sacrifice. We want to focus on their bravery. We want to focus on their legacy. Last week, while on a diplomatic military congressional delegation, which was headed up, and the idea was Congressman Bill Schuster's idea, and he also went the extra mile to make sure that he included freshman members in that so that we would get a chance to see what's going on over there. So last week, while on a diplomatic and military congressional delegation to Europe and Afghanistan, I attended a memorial service for the fallen heroes on this board. They are Lieutenant Colonel Frank Bryant, Major David Broder, Major Philip Ambard, Major Raymond Estelle, Major Jeffrey Osborne, Captain Charles Ransom, and Captain Nathan Nylander. Retired Lieutenant Colonel James McLaughlin, Technical Sergeant Tara Brown, Private First Class Jonathan Villanueva, and Staff Sergeant Matthew D. Hermanson. These are just some of the faces of those who have made the ultimate sacrifice while protecting America's interest abroad and helping to keep our country safe from threats far and wide. I am joined by a couple of my colleagues who were with me on a fact-finding trip. We will focus on the sacrifice made by these brave men and women, as well as the sacrifices being made by all of our brave men and women on a daily basis. With that, Mr. Speaker, I want to yield to my Congressman, Bill Schuster, who will have the opportunity to not only talk about one or two or three of the individuals who gave the ultimate sacrifice, but just on the experience in Afghanistan, where we are, the progress we're making. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I would yield.
I thank the gentleman from Louisiana for yielding, and thank the gentleman for traveling with us on our CODEL, which was a bipartisan CODEL made up of 6 members, 2 Democrats, 4 Republicans, and we traveled to, obviously, as the gentleman from Louisiana said, to Afghanistan. It was, I think, an eye-opening experience for all of us, getting to see and hear firsthand from not only our military leaders, but also soldiers who are in the field and traveling out to the Herat province and being able to go into a village and talk to the village elders and the people that 18 months ago in this village, it was controlled by the Taliban, and today, with the help of U.S. Special Forces, the Taliban is gone, and the people of this community, the people of this village and region are setting up their own police force. And the village elder told us, committed to us, that he would never allow the Taliban to come back, and how much he appreciated the support of the U.S. Special Forces and their training, and the fact that they were living with them in the community. 30 of our Special Forces in 2 different compounds, again offering training and guidance to these folks that live out in a very, very rural part of Afghanistan, actually 50 to 60 miles from the Iranian border, and they're doing good work. So we saw those kinds of positive developments. And of course, we all know what happened at the end of this weekend. Our Special Forces were able to go in and kill Osama bin Laden and bring justice to him, and America is grateful for their efforts. As my colleague said, we were also able to participate in 2 ceremonies. One was a ramp ceremony of one of our fallen heroes, that they actually put the coffin on the plane to bring it back to Dover Air Force Base to meet its final destination. And then also a ceremony to honor the 9 fallen Americans that were killed by an Afghan pilot, somebody they had been working with for 9 months, somebody they trusted, who came in during a meeting on last week and brought in a weapon and killed 9 people. They were not all military. There were 8 military people or people that serve in our military, and 1 civilian, a civilian contractor, a retired lieutenant colonel. So it was officers and enlisted people, and all of them gave the ultimate sacrifice serving for us in Afghanistan. And it was also the largest loss of life for the U.S. Air Force since the Khobar Towers were bombed by Osama bin Laden some 12 or 13 years ago. So tonight we were joining here, and I think we're going to be joined by others that were on the trip to talk about these individuals and honor these individuals. So with that, the first person that we want to honor is Major Jeffrey O. Osborne, who was a NATO air training. He was in the NATO Air Training Command in Afghanistan. Major Osborne was born August 1969 in Oaks Bluff, Alabama. His military career began on August 9, 1991, after being commissioned as a 2nd lieutenant from Troy State University Reserve Officers Training Corps. After completing basic communications officer training at Kessler Air Base, he remained as an instructor for nearly 4 years, and in 1996, Major Osborne was selected for undergraduate pilot training and proceeded to Columbus Air Force Base, where, as a pilot trainee, he went on to earn the coveted Wings of Silver. Major Osborne went on to fly the C-130, eventually completing 2 flying tours in the mighty Herc. In 2001, he joined the Air Education and Training Command as an instructor pilot. Major Osborne spent 9 years in that command, transitioning through the T-37, the T-6, and the T-1 aircraft at Laughlin and Randolph Air Force bases. On November of 2010, Major Osborne joined the NATO Air Training Command in Afghanistan as a C-27 evaluator pilot and a chief of current operations with the 538th Air Expeditionary Advisory Squadron. His awards include the Bronze Star Medal, the Meritorious Service Medal, and the Aerial Achievement Medal. Major Osborne is survived by his wife Susanna, daughters Emily and Shelby, son Eric, and stepchildren Summer and Mitchell. Our hearts and prayers go out to that family for their loved one who gave the ultimate sacrifice. And so it is with that tonight that we remember Major Jeffrey O. Osborne. And with that, I yield to my colleague from Wisconsin, Mr. Duffy.
I am grateful for the gentleman from Pennsylvania. You know, we were on a trip together, a bipartisan trip to Afghanistan, and as we were able to tour the country and meet with our military leaders, our CIA, and our State Department, it was, for me, an interesting trip in that you see that support of our young men and women who are overseas fighting for their country does not have political boundaries. Our group on this trip came together and unanimously were supportive of the men and women who we have sent to defend this country. And I think it was quite remarkable to see this team come together. And before I talk further, I would like to yield to the gentleman from Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Congressman Duffy, for yielding. And I know that your constituent and the person from Wisconsin was someone that you wanted to talk about, and you had the privilege of performing the RAMP Act. I wanted to give you a chance to switch podium so that you can go down now that we have their pictures presented. But I also want to take a minute to say what a RAMP Act is, and it's a ceremony performed in the country of the soldier's death. It's not a funeral, but it's a memorial, and it's a goodbye to a fallen soldier on their return home. So this solemn ceremony, and may have words by a chaplain or a commanding officer, but it's just a very, very surreal experience in the fact that all of the troops are out there, and we had a chance to participate in that, to watch one of our fallen soldiers get put back on a plane to be sent home to his parents and the family that he left behind. So that is our farewell for them. And I will tell you that the ceremony is performed for all coalition forces, not just the U.S. military. So it was that ceremony that we had a chance to participate in, and it was one that was very humbling, something I will never forget. And with that, I will yield back to the gentleman from Wisconsin, Congressman Duffy, to talk about his constituent who we had the privilege of watching and participating in that RAMP Act. Congressman Duffy.
And I'm grateful to the gentleman from Louisiana for yielding. I do want to briefly talk about one of our Wisconsin heroes who last week was fighting for his country in the Wardock province. It's Matthew Hermanson, who is pictured here in the lower left corner of our diagram. He is from Appleton, Wisconsin, and he is survived by his wife and his parents. He was, again, last week fighting for his country. He was part of the 2nd Battalion, 4th Infantry Regiment, 4th Brigade Combat Team, 10th Mountain Division, and the division's 4th Brigade is stationed in Fort Polk. And, you know, in Wisconsin, we have, like many states, suffered losses recently, and our hearts go out to the family, the parents of Matt, and to his wife, who at a time when many Americans are celebrating what has happened in Pakistan with Osama bin Laden, this family and other families are grieving the loss of their loved one. And here is a great Wisconsin hero, a great American hero who was fighting for his country, who gave us the ultimate sacrifice in his pursuit for freedom. And I am grateful for all that he has given his state and his country, and we are proud of him. With that, I'll yield back to the gentleman from Louisiana.
Thank you, Congressman Duffy. And now, Mr. Speaker, I would like to yield to the gentleman from Connecticut, Congressman Chris Murphy, who was the senior Democrat on the trip, who provided an awful lot of guidance as a senior member of Congress in terms of what we were seeing and the effect.
Senator Richmond's kind of scary that I've get senior status in my 3rd term, but things move fast here in the United States House of Representatives. I want to thank you, gentlemen from Louisiana, for bringing us together for this special order hour. You know, I've been here now for 5 years, and you know, when votes are done and you go back to your office to get some work together for the next day, you know, we often flip on the TV and we watch these special order hours, as you know, frankly, millions of Americans do across the country. And you know, what you see every night, you know, essentially starts to look the same. You see Republicans on one side having 1 hour, Democrats on the other side having another hour, and too often that time is spent by both parties talking down the other side. This is unique to have members of both the Republican and Democratic side joining together in a testimony to something that binds us. It binds us as Republicans and Democrats, conservatives and liberals, whatever we are in this nation. We know how important it is to support our men and women abroad and then to memorialize them when they don't come home. And you know what? If you got any of us individually and asked what our perceptions were of our trip and of the future of the war in Afghanistan, you'd probably get different stories. But you won't get different stories when it comes to the respect that we have every day for the men and women who fight for us. And I think the new understanding you get of the threats that are posed to these brave soldiers when you spend a little bit of time in theater. Not only did we have the tragic honor of being part of a ramp ceremony and then a memorial service for the 9 airmen and civilians that perished in the attack at the airport, but we got the chance a day later to walk the beat, essentially, with some of our special forces units in the western province, one of the western provinces of Afghanistan. And that's where you realize how dangerous this job is. In a remote outpost with mud walls, a couple dozen of our bravest are trying to do their best to provide some security for Afghans in the Herat province who had barely seen a coalition or American soldier before the last year, trying to cobble together the money that they had at their disposal to build some infrastructure projects to make their lives of the community members and tribe members better. And whatever you think about the future course of this war, we got our best and our brightest fighting for us over there. 1% of Americans are fighting for this country, protecting the other 99%. And unfortunately, there are more and more that aren't coming home. In Connecticut, as I got the chance to remark in a short speech before the House of Representatives 2 weeks ago, we've taken an abnormally large number of casualties for a small state in the past 2 months. Unfortunately, one of the 9 airmen that were killed in the attack at the Kabul International Airport was Major Raymond Estelle II. Major Estelle was born in Connecticut. Although he had moved away, he was a native of the Nutmeg State. And his military career spanned 2 decades, back to November 1991, with his enlistment in the U.S. Air Force. After completing basic military and technical training, Raymond served as an enlisted aerospace ground equipment technician, rising to the rank of senior airman before earning his commission through the Reserve Officer Training Corps at the University of New Mexico in 1998. Major Estelle was most recently assigned as the communications advisor for the Afghan Air Force with the 838th Air Expeditionary Advisory Group. It was in that capacity that he was serving in Afghanistan. It was in that capacity that he had befriended the Afghan airmen who eventually turned his weapon on 9 Americans. Major Estelle's awards include the Bronze Star Medal, the Meritorious Service Medal, the Air Force Commendation Medal with 1 Oak Leaf Cluster, the Joint Service Achievement Medal, and the Air Force Achievement Medal with 1 Oak Leaf Cluster. He is survived by his wife, Captain Nakeba Estelle, and his daughters, Chanel and Shayla, and his son Raymond III, and his mother Regina. As we sat there listening to the final roll call of that unit with 9 of its members missing, we read through the biographies of the 9 that were killed, and we noted that almost all of them had children, young children, 3, 4, 5 kids. And as Representative Duffy so aptly said, as many Americans are celebrating in the street the heroic achievement of our special forces in taking down one of the most evil people ever to walk this earth, there are other families that are grieving today for those who put their lives on the line to protect the other 99% of us. And for my constituent, Raymond Estelle, we grieve in Connecticut today. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Congressman. Thank you, Congressman Murphy. And I think that you brought up a very good point, which was the observation of the sacrifice and the fact that as we looked at all of the boots and the helmet of the 9 troops during that boot ceremony, the fact that it crossed all lines. It crossed partisan lines, it crossed racial lines, it crossed geographic lines, and it certainly crossed different income levels. So I just wanted to reiterate that the reason why we're here today with such a bipartisan and diverse group showing our appreciation, because that was one of the things that was so noticeable when we participated in that ceremony, the fact that it was a very diverse group, but there was one consistent and one overwhelming issue, one overwhelming purpose, and that was to make sure that the United States of America stays the best country on earth, and to make sure that this next generation, we leave them and we give them the opportunity to succeed and the opportunity to live in peace. I will just quickly read, and it was one night while we were meeting in Batumi, and we were having a deep conversation about the sacrifice that our children are making, the sacrifice that the troops were making. And there was a parliamentarian from Batumi who used the John Quincy Adams quote, and it was the sentiment of everyone. So I just thought that I would point out that quote and read it to everybody, and especially, Mr. Speaker, it's so on point that I thought people need to hear it, and that is, "I must study politics and war, that my sons may have the liberty to study mathematics and philosophy, geography, natural history, and naval architecture, navigation, commerce, and agriculture, in order to give their children a right to study painting, poetry, music, architecture, statuary, tapestry, and porcelain." And that's John Quincy Adams. And, Mr. Speaker, I would just again reiterate the fact that, you know, it seems like we have been fighting forever to make sure that we give those next generations the freedom, and that they don't have to concentrate on war so much, and that they don't have to ship their children off to war, and we don't have to welcome our troops back home in caskets. That's the sacrifice we're making, and we hope that we make that sacrifice so the next generations can study the arts and the culture and all of those things. With that, Mr. Speaker, I will yield time to, again, the leader of that congressional delegation, Bill Schuster.
I thank the gentleman, and I appreciate the gentleman talking about meeting with other parliamentarians and some of the other countries that we visited, from the Czech Republic to Azerbaijan to Georgia. And one of the things all 3 of those countries have in common are they are really great allies of the United States of America. All those countries contribute forces to not only to Afghanistan but to Iraq, and currently they either have or have just had troops returning, and when you look at a country like Azerbaijan that lives in a rough neighborhood between Iran to the south and Russia to the north, Georgia sits on the Russian border and has had problems with Russia, but when those countries send their troops to fight shoulder to shoulder with the Americans, they have no caveats, which means that their troops are allowed to do whatever the Americans, whatever the NATO forces need them to do, whether it's combat, whether it's special forces, whether it's supporting the NATO troops and the American troops in some other way. So it's really important that we as Americans know these countries and support what they do for us. And when people think and they hear that Georgia supplied 900 troops to the effort in Afghanistan just recently, a lot of people would say, well, that's not a very big force. But when you look that it's a country of about 4.5 million people, that would be the equivalent of the United States contributing 80 to 90,000 troops to the effort. So it's really a big contribution, and we owe them a debt of gratitude to those countries that do that around the world. As my colleagues have been talking about, we're honoring those 9 that were killed last week in Afghanistan, and of the 9, as I said earlier, 8 were in the U.S. Air Force, but 1 was a civilian, a contractor. That person was Lieutenant Colonel retired James McLaughlin, or as he was commonly known as Jimmy Mack, was one of the 9. And James Aloysius McLaughlin, Jr. was born on June 16, 1955. He graduated from Drexel University with a Bachelor of Science degree and earned a Master's degree in Business Administration from the University of Phoenix. Jim retired from the U.S. Army as a Lieutenant Colonel in 2007 after service in Iraq. His civilian career included Program Manager, Marketing Manager, and Applications Engineer Manager with the Limo USA. Jim's most recent service was a contractor with L3 Communications, MPRI division supporting the NATO Training Command mission in Kabul, Afghanistan. During that time, he was a senior mentor to both the Ministry of Defense and the Afghan Air Force. Jim held military and civilian ratings in both rotary and fixed-wing aircraft. One of his passions was his ham radio, and he held a current amateur radio license. He had a network of fellow ham radio operators throughout the United States and the world. And James McLaughlin is survived by his wife, Sandra, and their 3 children, Adam, Eve, and James, all of Santa Rosa, California. All Americans should keep them, their families in our thoughts and our prayers, and we give, again, a thank you to not only to James McLaughlin for giving the ultimate sacrifice, but for his family that have to suffer this great, great loss. And with that, I yield back to the gentleman from Louisiana.
Thank you, Congressman Schuster. And with that, I will yield to our Congressman Chris Murphy so that he can again pay tribute to another one of our fallen American heroes.
Thank you, Representative Richmond. I know we're joined on the floor by a few other of our colleagues here. I just underscore the remarks of Representative Schuster. Although Americans clearly are carrying the burden of operations in Afghanistan, we do have partners there, and many of our partners increased their commitment to Afghanistan as the United States did. Others have walked away and drawn down their commitment, but we are fortunate that we are not fighting this fight alone there, and that we do have partners. And I think it's important for us to remind Americans of that, but also remind many of our allies that this fight is an international fight, because though the most high profile of terrorist attacks in this world were those on New York and Washington, D.C., and the fields of Pennsylvania, the next terrorist attack could be anywhere in this world, and our ability to push al-Qaeda to the brink of extinction is a global effort, not just an American effort. In addition to those that we've noted already, there was another airman who we memorialized that day, and I'd like to just for a brief moment of time talk about Major Charles A. Ransom. Major Ransom was born in 1979. He attended the Virginia Military Institute, and he earned a Baccalaureate of Science in Computer Science, and he received his ROTC commission in the United States Air Force as a second lieutenant on the 18th of May, 2001. It was in that year that he deployed for the first time in support of Operation Enduring Freedom. Then in 2006, he deployed again in Turkey in support of Operations Enduring Freedom, Iraqi Freedom, and Fundamental Justice. And then in 2009, he deployed to Baghdad, Iraq, in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom. Finally, in 2011, he deployed for the last time to Afghanistan in Operation Enduring Freedom. He's survived by his mother and father, Sergeant retired Willie and Mary Sue Ransom, and his brother, Chief Petty Officer Stephen Randolph. From those that talked about Major Ransom, they talked about what a tremendously important figure he was in our operations in Afghanistan. But his story and his background are not uncommon in two ways. First, Major Ransom comes from a military family. Both his brother and his father have served and are retired from the armed services. And that's how it goes. This becomes a family occupation and a family passion. There are millions of families around this country who have the kind of commitment that the Ransom family did. And while we pay our respects to those individuals who served, we frankly have to remember that this is not just an individual commitment This is not just an individual sacrifice. This is a family sacrifice, that the whole family serves, whether they are serving through brothers and sisters and fathers and mothers who have been members of the military, or whether they simply serve by picking up and doing a little bit more for their family while their loved one is away. But he's also not unique in the fact that this was his 4th deployment. Now, when we talk about the heroes from previous wars, they are no less heroes because they only served 1 or 2 tours. But there is something unique about the last 10 years in that there are more and more people like Major Ransom who have gone back not just for a 2nd time, not just for a 3rd time, but in Major Ransom's case for a 4th time. He did it. And listen, I can't speak for the reasons why he did it, but I imagine he did it because he knew of the importance of the work that he was doing. He knew that he didn't want to leave his men and women behind to do it on their own. And unfortunately, Representative Richmond, Major Ransom didn't come back from his 4th deployment, but we owe him and his family, frankly, a degree of gratitude beyond words for their service and their sacrifice as an entire family. I yield back.
Thank you, Congressman Murphy. I'll yield time to Congressman Duffy.
I appreciate the gentleman from Louisiana for yielding, and I would echo the sentiment as stated by the gentleman from Connecticut. I think he's right. You look at the families and how they suffer when they lose one of their sons or daughters or fathers or mothers. It truly is felt, and I think it was well said. Just quickly, you know, as we were on this trip, we had a chance not just to go to Afghanistan, but this bipartisan delegation had a chance to go see many of our great allies in the conflict in Afghanistan. We stopped over in Georgia and Azerbaijan and the Czech Republic. And what I thought was so unique as I went to those countries was their unabashed support for American principles, not just American principles, human principles of freedom and liberty and prosperity. And when we look around the world and people talk about America, oftentimes they pay us great lip service. They tell us they're our friend and they're supportive of what we're doing in the world, but oftentimes their actions don't meet their words. But you look at these 3 countries that we visited, they just don't express by word their support for what we do here in America, but they show their support. And they've shown that support most definitely by way of sending their troops to Afghanistan to fight for the freedom of those Afghanis who want to see some form of democracy in their country. Again, while we were in Afghanistan, we participated in a memorial ceremony for the 9 Americans who were shot at the airport and were killed. I want to remember tonight Major Philip Ombard, one of those who lost his life last week in that attack. He was born in Caracas, Venezuela, on the 4th of April, 1967. And he lived in Venezuela until he was 12 years old, at which time he moved to America. And he was then living in Edmonds, Washington. Now, he started his military career in 1985. He enlisted in the United States Air Force. And with a stellar enlisted career, he rose to the rank of Master Sergeant. And from there, he attended night school, all the while raising a young family, and he obtained his bachelor's degree. He was then selected to go to officer training school in 2000. He was given his most recent assignment as a foreign language professor at the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. He taught both Spanish and French. As we've discussed here, the loss of one of our military men and women is felt throughout the family. And Major Ombard was survived not only by his wife Linda, but he had 5 children: Alexander, Timothy, Joshua, Patrick, his daughter Emily, his mother and father, and his sister Diana. And I know as they go into this week and to the coming months and years, they will mourn the loss of their father, their son, their brother, their husband. And I just want Major Ombard's family to know that we are grateful for his service. We're grateful for the sacrifice he gave to his country. And we're grateful to them for the sacrifice that they're making, where they don't have their loved one at home with them tonight sharing a meal. They're not going to have Christmases and birthday parties together. And that most definitely is a sacrifice that they'll feel for a lifetime. And I am grateful for what he's done, paying the ultimate sacrifice for his country. With that, I'd like to yield back to the gentleman from Louisiana.
Thank you, Congressman Duffy. And with that, I would like to yield to another member that took the time